I'm fascinated by abstract, non-narrative films. To me, it's more like music because you can watch them repeatedly and the audience can interpret what they want. And so that began both a collaboration with artists and a journey of using traditional tools in non-traditional ways. My first job was at VCA Teletronics, which is one of the original post, if not the original post house in New York City. I was hired as an engineer, but the deal was that I got to play with all the equipment on the weekends to make video art. Editing in a linear editing room in those days took thousands of square feet of equipment, millions of dollars, massive amounts of maintenance. So getting access to that stuff was a really big deal. The very first piece I ever made is a piece called Modulated Horizontal Lines, set to Terry Riley. Then in the 80s, I did a piece with Stefan Goswewski and The Clash, worked with Thomas Vivico, worked with Maureen Nappy, and met John Sanborn, who really has become sort of a lifelong video art partner. There was an 80s electronic art scene that included the original New Timberland Orchestra synthesizer guys to Philip Glass and the whole minimalist world to Laurie Anderson to Max Almy to all of us making video art. And it was all connected. And Namjoon Paik, of course, was sort of the master of all this and our hero. Just by proximity, the whole art world sort of fed on itself. And it was all new. You know, the fact that artists were starting to get access to video was a big deal. And even as hard as it was a big change. But it went on to this world of using post-production tools for things they weren't meant to be used for, to build all this abstract imagery. This is also, remember, before computer graphics.
A very similar effect is called trail, and this tracks motion across the screen.
So there's no rendering involved in this. This is building up real-time feedback and layers and then recording them and putting them on top of themselves. We always start with the music. Everything is always driven by the track. And so when we are developing a new piece, as we are right now, the first thing we'll do is we'll take the track and we'll analyze it and we'll break it down. And we'll break it down into sections because even though there is not a narrative arc, there's absolutely a visual arc to these pieces. And they are meant to take you on a journey, and otherwise it's just a bunch of stuff on a screen. So we develop an outline for that. We do something called structured improvisation because we want the image possibility you get from more of the computer graphics world, but we want the jazz improvisation of the synthesizer world. So we tend to start with programs and push them to places they're not meant to be. So that can be plugins where we make weird variables. It can be, in After Effects and Premiere, it can be combining things. We get them in their nonlinear regions. We get them to make weird images, we record them, and then we layer them back on top of themselves. And unlike in the analog world, where at best at the end I was doing 50 layers, now I can do 1,000 layers. And so we tend to find these things that hopefully surprise us and delight us. We record them and then we build and we build. And then sometimes we'll take a bunch of elements and say, okay, now we want to build a construct, and how do we light this, and how do we put the pieces together to build it up? It's really not different than what we did 40 years ago in a linear editing room at Teletronics, where we had 8 videotape machines going, 7 playback and 1 record, and we had all these little bits going through DVEs and feeding back into a switcher, and we recorded it. John Sanborn and I did Act 3 with Philip Glass literally 40 years ago at VCA Teletronics. Philip made a cut for us from The Photographer, that album, and we went off and started building to it, and it was recognized as a significant piece from that era. About a year ago, we finally said, it's going to be 40 years. We should make the sequel. The music to NC2 is from an album that is all tributes to Terry Riley for his 80th birthday. Sarah Cahill, John's wife, is playing the piano to a track written by Elena Rohr, who's a professor at MIT. We tried to take that aesthetic of like what's a dream, what isn't, what's reality, what isn't, what is chaos, and redo it in the modern era. Premiere is used for everything this way, and After Effects is used this way. The first thing I did was to take the soundtrack and redo it at 48K. And then once we laid that to 24 frame per second video in Premiere, now we were able to break it up into sections, and we were able to think about what happens in each section and how do they relate and whatever. Now it turns out that once after we started, John actually had to go in for a heart operation. And so the very beginning of the piece, he wasn't, he was in the hospital and I was just ad-libbing with a plug-in in After Effects that started to look like a heart. And so I recorded it and layered it. And then John shot 4 dancers in his studio in Oakland. And the 4 dancers are performing to the track. We just had it on a loop there so they could be recorded on green screen. And the 4 dancers provide us with human motion to seed things, so it's not computer graphic splines. I mean, sometimes they appear literally, like in the beginning when you see her in the heart, and sometimes they're just there as data, but they're there throughout the entire piece. After Effects here was critical because that's how I was able to light and layer and build everything. Now, once we have our basic images, I often would go off and really flowchart how they would have to get layered together to get the lighting right, to get the kind of levels of subtlety, particularly like say in the opening where you see those beautiful lit dark things. The connection between After Effects and Premiere is really great because you can set up a bunch of elements in After Effects and immediately look at them in your cut without having to output them, which is really handy. The key to this workflow is being able to have multiple streams of ProRes 444 at UHD resolution at once coming into the machine. I can't work with proxies in this workflow because when you're forcing these programs to go into their nonlinear regions and do things that they're not designed to do, nothing would be repeatable. You only make that image at that resolution, at that file format. And you have to have enough data rate to be able to do that for multiple streams. And that's the key of using the Iodine. It's the only Thunderbolt-based product that has that kind of throughput. I think what the Iodine Creative Suite combination gives you is that much more real-time design potential. Together, it's seamless, just disappears and it all works.